Welcome to the Behind Closed Doors channel. Wishing you a peaceful day. Today, I'd like to share the following story with you. I hope you enjoy listening to my story. Now, please.
Why I dumped soup on my husband's head and walked out forever. Part 1. The bitter taste of broth. Wife, come out and eat. The food is getting cold. We've already finished. My mother's stir-fried chicken is absolutely incredible today. I ate so much I'm about to burst. I couldn't swallow another bite if I tried. My husband, Tron Lee, walked into the bedroom, letting out a loud, greasy burp that hung heavy in the air. I gave a tight, exhausting nod, carefully setting our 3-month-old daughter Lay down onto the mattress. She had just finished nursing and was fast asleep. My stomach let out a fierce, hollow growl. She was eating so much these days, it felt as though she was literally draining the life and nutrients right out of my body. Hearing Tron Lee mention his mother's signature chicken, a faint spark of anticipation flared up in my chest. Ever since we had arrived at their family's rural village, he had raved non-stop about how his mother's cooking was a culinary masterpiece unmatched by anything in the city. I stood up, adjusting my clothes, and walked out to the dining table. The moment I stepped into the room, I froze. On the table sat a solitary plate of cold mantou, a small saucer of pickled mustard greens, and an oval ceramic dish. The dish was completely empty of meat. Well, not entirely empty. Swimming in the center of the plate was a shallow pool of dark, oily broth with a few stray, soggy scallion rings floating miserably on top. I stared at it, my mind blanking out for a second. Did they save my portion in the kitchen? I thought, trying to rationalize the situation. Surely they put some aside in the pots so it wouldn't get cold. I hurried into the kitchen, my heart pounding with a sudden anxious dread. I lifted every single pot lid on the stove. Nothing. Every single pot was scrubbed clean, practically sparkling under the dim kitchen light. Forget a piece of chicken, there wasn't even a scrap of gristle left behind. So, they ate it all? An entire family of grown adults sat down and devoured a whole chicken, leaving absolutely nothing for the nursing mother of their grandchild but a plate of cold buns and leftover grease? A hot, searing wave of fury instantly ignited in my chest, rushing straight to my head. I genuinely could not believe that people could treat a postpartum, breastfeeding woman with such blatant, casual cruelty. Right at that moment, my mother-in-law, Li Xuan, heard the clatter of the pot lids. She strolled out of her bedroom, a smirking, unreadable expression plastered across her weathered face. She leaned against the doorframe, looking at me with squinted eyes. "Jai Jai, what are you just standing there staring for? Hurry up and eat. Eat more, you're looking far too skinny. Skinny women bring no blessings or prosperity to a household. Oh, and by the way," she added, her voice dropping into a casual, commanding tone, "once you're done eating, go ahead and wash the dishes. We have strict rules in this house. Whoever eats last is the one who washes up." Listening to her smooth, condescending voice, I was so angry that a cynical laugh forced its way out of my throat. They didn't save a single bite of real food for me, and now I was expected to clean up after the feast I was excluded from? What am I supposed to eat from this barren wasteland of a table? Am I supposed to feast on air? Am I supposed to drink the leftover chicken backwash? Has anyone in the history of daughter-in-laws ever been bullied quite this brazenly?
Part 2. The Toll of Sweet Talk. Tran Lee and I were college sweethearts. We chose each other freely, dating for several years before getting married the previous year. This year, we welcomed our beautiful baby girl, Lei. Normally, our lives were anchored in Beijing. I'm a Beijing native through and through, born, raised, and rooted in the capital. Tranli, on the other hand, came from a deeply rural province within the traditional Shanha region. My parents are retired state-owned enterprise employees. While they were never high-ranking officials, they were comfortable, stable city dwellers. Because both of my parents were only children, they had inherited multiple properties in the city from my grandparents. Naturally, my family's financial situation was exceptionally solid. When we first started getting serious, I had my reservations. I worried about the vast cultural and socio-economic chasm between a rural upbringing and a metropolitan lifestyle. I feared the inevitable friction between our families. But Tranli pursued me with an intense, fiery devotion from the moment we met. He was sweet, attentive, and constantly promised me that after marriage we would live exclusively in Beijing. He swore we'd only ever visit his hometown during major holidays. I thought that sounded reasonable. After all, if I only had to interact with my in-laws for a few days out of the year, how bad could it be? We could easily maintain a polite, respectful distance. So we married. Aside from a brief, chaotic trip to his village for the traditional wedding ceremony, we spent our entire lives in Beijing. When the baby arrived, everything seemed peaceful. Until Lei turned 3 months old. Suddenly, Tranli approached me with a deeply earnest expression. He explained that his village had an unyielding custom. When a child reaches 100 days, a grand 100-day feast must be held in the ancestral home. The primary purpose, he admitted rather bluntly, was to reclaim the red envelope money his parents had gifted to other villagers over the decades. To be completely honest, I didn't want to go. The baby was far too young, and long-distance travel with an infant is a logistical nightmare. Furthermore, my husband's hometown was the epitome of undeveloped rural life. The toilet was a crude pit squat in the outdoor courtyard. Food delivery apps didn't exist, and getting a package delivered required driving to the next township. I simply didn't know how to survive in an environment like that. But I couldn't withstand his relentless begging. He moped around the apartment, claiming that if we didn't bring the baby back, the entire village would mock his parents and whisper that his city wife looked down on them.
Ultimately, my heart softened. I believed that marriage required mutual compromise. Tranli had always treated me like a princess in Beijing. Surely I could endure a brief week of discomfort for his sake and his family's pride. So I packed the baby bags and boarded the train. But the very second my feet touched the soil of his village, even a fool could see that the atmosphere had shifted drastically. My mother-in-law, Li Xuan, who had always been overly sweet and accommodating over video calls, suddenly turned ice cold. There was no warm welcome, no enthusiastic questions about my health. On our first night, the traditional brick bed, Kong, was freezing cold because she hadn't bothered to stoke the fire early enough. When we stepped inside, there was only one new pair of indoor slippers waiting, bought specifically for her son. When I asked about it, she simply shrugged carelessly. "Oh, I didn't know what shoe size you wore, Jai Jai. Just walk around barefoot or wear your sneakers, you'll manage."
every single morning, without fail, she would bang violently on our bedroom door at precisely 6 o'clock, shouting for me to get up and help around the house, completely disregarding the fact that I had been awake every hour of the night, soothing a crying, nursing infant. Then there was the food. I absolutely despise cilantro. The taste makes me physically gag. Yet, out of 10 dishes she placed on the table, 8 of them were heavily blanketed in cilantro. When I politely pointed it out, she merely sniffed. In the countryside, we don't have your fancy city palates. Without cilantro, food has no aroma. Just pick around it. Though these slights left a bitter taste in my mouth, I swallowed my pride and endured them. My own grandparents had passed away before I was born, and my parents shared a deeply loving, egalitarian marriage. I had grown up in a bubble of absolute peace. I had never witnessed, let alone experienced, the legendary toxicity of a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law dynamic. No one had ever taught me that when entering a traditional husband's household, a woman must establish firm boundaries immediately to protect herself. My own mother was simply too kind, too traditional. Before I left for the village, she held my hands and reminded me repeatedly, "Jai, when you are at your husband's home, you must be filial, hard-working, and respectful. Treat his parents as your own." So I did. I entered their home with a heart full of genuine sincerity and vulnerability. When we were planning our wedding, Tran Nhi looked at me with puppy dog eyes and talked about how difficult his parents' lives were as farmers. He asked if we could keep the traditional bride price, Sing Lei, to an absolute minimum. My family, wanting to show we weren't greedy, agreed to a purely symbolic amount of 31,800 yuan, a number chosen simply because it sounded auspicious for wealth. The morning after our wedding night, Tran Li sighed heavily, claiming his parents had gone into debt to pay for the banquet. Foolish and naive as I was, before we even boarded the train back to Beijing, I handed the entire 31,800 yuan bride price right back to him, telling him to give it to his parents to clear their debt. I had 0 guards up against them. In fact, I treated them better than my own flesh and blood. Even while living comfortably in Beijing, I never spared any expense for his parents. The smartphones they used, I bought them. Their rural cooperative medical insurance, I paid the premiums annually. I even paid a lump sum to backfill his mother's missing Social Security years so she could draw a monthly pension when she turned 60. I genuinely believed that sincerity would be met with sincerity. How utterly laughable. I now realized that exchanging sincerity for sincerity was nothing more than a sucker's game. My profound kindness had been viewed not as grace, but as a green light to trample all over me. The human psyche is a strange, twisted thing. The more you proactively lower yourself to accommodate others, the less value they place on your existence. They don't see an understanding, sweet woman. They see a cheap, desperate girl who values herself at 0, and what is cheap is never respected. And that brought us to today. Just because her precious son casually mentioned he missed his mother's chicken, Li Xuan had woken up at dawn to slaughter, pluck, and stew a chicken. And the result? The entire family stuffed themselves to the brim, leaving the nursing mother of their grandchild with a barren, oily plate. This was the absolute final straw. The dam of my patience cracked wide open.
Part 3. The boiling point. Facing my mother-in-law's smug, challenging smirk, I didn't bother maintaining the polite, submissive daughter-in-law facade for a single second longer. My face dropped into an icy, unyielding mask. Eat?
Eat what exactly? Am I supposed to eat the air, or am I supposed to chew on these empty plates? Normally, my voice was soft, courteous, and yielding. They had never heard me speak with such sharp, venomous clarity. Li Xuan's face darkened instantly. What kind of attitude is that? What do you mean, eat air? Are you blind? Are those mantou on the table invisible to you? I let out a cold, mocking laugh, stripping away every ounce of respect. What decent, self-respecting family forces a postpartum woman who is actively breastfeeding to survive on plain, dry bread? I am locked in that suffocating bedroom, sweating and exhausting myself to nurse your grandchild, while the three of you sit out here and gorge yourselves on a full table of food. Good heavens, I have lived in the capital my entire life, and I have never witnessed such utterly uneducated, low-class behavior. The moment the words uneducated and low-class left my mouth, Li Xuan lost her mind. She couldn't handle the direct hit to her rural pride. She went from smug to savage in an instant, a dramatic gasp followed by her throwing herself straight down onto the dirt-smudged floor, slapping her thighs violently and wailing at the top of her lungs. "Oh, look at this! Heaven help me! I break my back cooking a hot meal for this family, and instead of a single word of gratitude, I get cursed and insulted by my own son's wife. Who says we didn't leave you food? Isn't there still broth right there? I knew it. I knew it from the day you stepped foot here. You look down on us country folks. You're just looking for any excuse to throw a tantrum and humiliate an old woman." Hearing the ear-piercing shrieks, Tran Li came rushing out of the bedroom. Seeing his mother splayed on the floor in tears, his protective instinct flared up. He turned to me, his brow furrowed in deep irritation. "Wife, what is wrong with you? My mother worked herself to the bone cooking for everyone, and you're out here picking fights. If you like the food, eat more. If you don't like it, eat less. Why do you have to create a massive scene over nothing?" I stared at him, my laughter turning entirely devoid of humor. "I'm creating a scene? Tran Li, are you legally blind or are you stupid? Look at this table. Is there a single shred of actual substance left? Do you honestly expect me to sit here and choke down dry buns?" Faced with my fierce glare, Tran Li's eyes flickered down to the scraped-clean plates. A fleeting look of guilt and embarrassment washed over his faces, but he quickly masked it with a defensive mumble. "Well, it's just because my mom's cooking is too good. We got carried away and accidentally finished it. We just forgot you hadn't eaten yet. Can't you just dip the mantou into the chicken broth and eat that? I'm telling you, when I was a kid, my absolute favorite treat was dipping dry buns into leftover broth. All the actual nutrients and vitamins from the chicken are concentrated in the liquid anyway." He stood there, gesturing wildly, completely immersed in his ridiculous logic. "Look at me. I grew up eating bun-dipped broth, and look how tall and strong I am. Stop being so spoiled." Listening to his endless, pathetic rambling, something in my brain snapped. Nutrients in the broth, fond childhood memories. Great. Since he loved it so much, I was going to give him a lifetime supply. Without a single word of warning, I reached out, grabbed the heavy ceramic dish filled with the dark, greasy, lukewarm chicken broth, and slammed it straight upside down on Tran Li's head.
Splat! "Is that so?" I hissed, twisting the plate over his skull for good measure. "Since you love broth so much, why don't you have a little more? Drink up, sweetie. Maybe if you soak in it, you'll grow a few more centimeters and blast straight into space. Is this enough nutrients for you? Because if it isn't, I can gladly march into the kitchen and dump the filthy wastewater from the bottom of the wood stove right over your face." For a solid 10 seconds, the entire room fell into a deathly, terrifying silence. The dark, oily broth, speckled with floating bits of scallions and chicken fat, began oozing down Tran Lee's forehead, dripping off the tip of his nose and running in greasy rivulets down his neck into his pristine shirt. Lee Swan's wailing cut off instantly. Her jaw dropped so low it looked ready to detach from her face. She sat frozen on the floor, staring at me like she was looking at a demon. Tran Lee wiped a hand violently across his eyes, his entire face shining with a thick, repulsive layer of poultry fat. His eyes turned bloodshot with pure, unadulterated rage as he screamed, "Ding Jai, are you completely insane? What the hell do you think you're doing?" Insane? No. I had just officially run out of ducks to give. I ignored his screaming completely. I marched straight into the bedroom, threw on my heavy winter coat, scooped my sleeping baby into my arms, and walked right back out toward the front door. Tran Lee, his hair standing up in greasy, broth-soaked clumps, scrambled to block my path, his chest heaving. "Stand right there. Where do you think you're going with my daughter?" I scoffed. "Where do you think? I'm going out to eat real food. I refuse to starve to death in this house." He grimaced, trying to retain some semblance of control. "Go out to eat? Are you stupid? Look around you. This is the countryside. There are no restaurants here. We have instant noodles in the cupboard. I'll go boil a pack for you. Stop being completely unreasonable and creating a drama out of—" Before he could finish the word unreasonable, I pulled back my leg and kicked him square in the shin with the hard toe of my boot. Crack! Tran Lai let out a high-pitched yelp, instantly clutching his leg and hopping around on one foot like a wounded animal. I didn't give him a second glance. I threw open the heavy wooden door and stepped out into the village air. He was right about one thing. There were no commercial restaurants in this god-forsaken village. But there were neighbors, and more importantly, there were the village gossips. I looked down the dirt road and locked my eyes onto the houses belonging to the notorious busybodies of the community. I marched straight toward them. "Uncle, has your family eaten yet?" I called out sweetly to an old man smoking a pipe outside his gate. "I might not recognize me. I'm Tran Lai's wife. Yes, the one from Beijing. I was in the bedroom nursing the baby, and by the time I came out, the family had completely cleaned out the table. They didn't leave me a single bite." "Oh, your family has finished eating. No worries. I'll go ask the neighbors next door." I walked to the next house. "Auntie, is there any chance I could buy a bowl of rice from you? I just finished breastfeeding, and my in-laws ate the entire dinner without saving me anything. I don't mind going hungry, but I'm terrified my breast milk will dry up and the baby will starve." "Oh, you're asking where Tran Lai is? Oh, he ate so much chicken he's currently lying in bed with his mother, rubbing his belly and chatting." "Sister," I called out to a woman hanging laundry, "is there a small grocery store nearby? I'm Tran Lai's wife. My in-laws ate every scrap of food tonight and didn't leave me a portion, so I'm trying to find somewhere to buy a piece of bread." I repeated this routine, moving systematically from house to house. If a family was in the middle of eating, I politely declined their invitation to sit down, making sure to look as pathetic and pale as humanly possible. When kind-hearted souls tried to hand me candies or biscuits, I merely let my eyes well up with tears, shook my head softly, and refused. In less than 30 minutes, I had walked through almost the entire village, speaking to nearly every single neighbor on the main road. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the entire village of Tran Truan Kui knew one undeniable, scandalous fact.
the eldest son's fancy Beijing wife had traveled thousands of miles with their infant grandchild, only to be starved and denied a single piece of chicken by her malicious in-laws. The news spread faster than a wildfire in a dry forest. Within an hour, even the stray dogs at the edge of the village had probably heard about it. Down by the village square, a group of older aunts who gathered every evening to chat were absolutely buzzing with excitement. Oh Lord, it's completely devoid of virtue. The poor girl is actively nursing a newborn, and they couldn't even manage to leave her a single piece of meat. How utterly wicked. Tran Lai and his parents are completely ruthless. A whole table of chicken, and they scraped it clean. I heard they literally left her nothing but the dirty broth to dip her bread in. Who treats a human being like that? Even if you hate the daughter-in-law, you have to think about your own grandchild. If the mother doesn't eat, where is the milk supposed to come from? Exactly. And you know what else? I remember when they got married, that Beijing girl didn't ask for a single cent of a proper bride price. Tran Lai's mother was so incredibly smug back then, bragging to everyone who would listen about how brilliant her son was, marrying a rich city girl without spending a single copper coin. And look at her now. She's being bullied like a dog. That's why I always say, these only child city girls have absolutely no brains. No bride price, no gold jewelry, no demands. They literally hand themselves over for free. When you make yourself that cheap, who is ever going to cherish you?
Look at my daughter-in-law. I had to fork out a staggering 280,000 yuan in cash just to get her through the door. Do you think I dare mistreat her now? Heavens no, I treat her like an absolute ancestor. If she packs up and leaves, my family loses a fortune. The higher the price, the heavier the respect. It sounds crude, but it's the absolute truth. You're entirely right. When my daughter gets married, I am demanding a massive bride price. I won't let her be treated like trash. Walking slowly past them, listening to their harsh but painfully accurate words, the blazing anger in my chest began to cool into something far more dangerous: absolute clarity. They weren't wrong. When you waive the bride price out of the goodness of your heart, the other party doesn't think you're being understanding or elegant. They think you're worthless. They think you're desperate, that you're flawed, or that you're terrified of being an old maid. And humans never take care of things they obtain for free. Having successfully dragged his family's reputation through the dirt, I decided it was time to head back. My stomach was still painfully empty, and if I was going to have another round of screaming matches, I needed to be properly fueled. However, as I approached the heavy wooden gates of my mother-in-law's courtyard, the sound of voices drifting from the open window made me stop dead in my tracks. It was Li Swan's voice, dripping with arrogance and venom. So what if she's from the big city of Beijing? I thought she was some precious, untouchable princess. But look at her now. Now that she's on our turf, doesn't she still have to behave like an obedient little dog? Even if a dragon flies into this valley, it has to coil up tightly under my thumb. I've been holding back my anger around her for over a year. Every single day, she acts all delicate, fragile, and sophisticated, unable to lift a single bucket of water. Before she had the baby, we had to coddle her because we needed her to extend the family line. But now, the child is already born. Do you honestly think I'm afraid she'll run away? Son, you listen to your mother, Li Swan continued, her voice taking on a dark, instructional tone. During the few days you two are here, I am going to properly break her in. I will teach her the rules of this family until she obeys your every whim without a single word of complaint. If we don't crush her spirit now, once you two go back to Beijing, she'll only become more arrogant and ride all over your back. A heartbeat later, Tran Li chimed in, smooth and entirely compliant.
"Mum, I'll listen to you. You're right." Standing outside in the freezing dark, my blood turned to pure ice. The chicken broth incident wasn't an accident. It wasn't a careless mistake because the food tasted too good. It was a calculated, deliberate opening move. It was a psychological strike designed to humiliate me, to test my boundaries, and to begin the process of breaking my spirit. But what truly shattered the final remnants of my heart was my husband's response. This man, who had spent years swearing he loved me more than life itself, who had catered to every whim in Beijing, was actively plotting with his mother to destroy my mental health. The moment he stepped back onto his village soil, the modern, loving husband mask dissolved, revealing the exact same toxic, patriarchal dinosaur as his ancestors. I slowly turned around. This time, there was no hesitation left in my soul. I held my baby tightly against my chest and walked 2 miles in the pitch-black night until I reached the main highway. I pulled out my phone, hailed a long-distance taxi, and rode straight to the bus terminal in the neighboring county. At that moment, I felt a profound sense of relief that I possessed the ingrained city habit of always keeping my phone, ID, and bank cards in my coat pockets. Otherwise, I would have been completely trapped in that den of wolves.
Part 4. The Flight to Freedom. I bought the very first ticket out of the county. 4 hours later, the bus crossed the boundary lines back into Beijing. Stepping out of the terminal, looking up at the familiar towering skyscrapers blotted against the neon sky, I finally felt the icy constriction in my chest loosen. I could breathe again. I was home. I caught a cab straight to a 24-hour Haidilao hot pot restaurant. I sat down at a private table and ordered a massive, lavish feast, everything from premium beef to my favorite side dishes. I gratefully handed my baby over to the trained restaurant attendants, who were more than happy to cradle and watch her play in the designated kids zone. For the first time in over 3 months, I sat down and ate a meal in absolute tranquility. I scrolled through videos on my phone, dipping fresh meat into the boiling spicy broth, savoring every single bite. Reflecting on it, the last time I had enjoyed a peaceful, uninterrupted meal like this was before I entered the labor room. Since the day Lei was born, every single meal had felt like a frantic battlefield, shoveling cold food into my mouth with one hand while bouncing a crying baby with the other. So, what exactly does marriage bring to a woman? It felt as though the pinnacle of my happiness had occurred before I ever signed that marriage certificate. Right as I was dipping a piece of seaweed into the broth, my phone began to vibrate violently. The screen displayed Tran Li's name. I tapped answer and placed it on the table, continuing to eat. The moment the line connected, his frantic, furious voice erupted from the speaker, loud enough to draw glances from the neighboring table. "Ding Jiai, where the hell are you? Get your ass back to this house right now. Do you have any idea what kind of absolute chaos you've caused? How could you possibly possess the malice to march through the entire village telling everyone we starved you? It was a minor, accidental misunderstanding. Did you really have to be so incredibly ruthless and vindictive? Do you know how humiliated my parents are right now? The entire village is laughing at them. People are literally walking past our gate, shouting insults and making fun of us. You and I get to pat our butts and run back to Beijing when this is over, but my parents have to live in this village for the rest of their lives. You need to turn around right now, come back and drop to your knees to apologize to them." Tran Li raged, his voice cracking with stress. I'm going to add you into the village WeChat group chat right now. You are going to send a public statement explaining that everything you said earlier was just a joke, that you're trying to become an influencer and were just filming a fake video for views." I calmly chewed my seaweed, swallowed, and took a sip of ice water before interrupting his hysterical tirade. "Apologize. Tell your mother she can wait until her next incarnation." Hearing my detached, freezing tone, his voice skyrocketed into an ugly, threatening shriek. "Ding Jiai, you don't dare push me. You better get back here and fix this mess." I listened to his raging for a moment before interrupting him completely flatly. "Listen to me. Once this drama blows over, when we return to Beijing, we're bringing my parents with us. We're going to let them move into that vacant apartment your parents own near the city center. It's sitting empty anyway. It's a complete waste. They'll stay there until the village forgets about this gossip." The chopsticks in my hand froze mid-air. I stared at the phone, completely stunned by the sheer, unadulterated audacity radiating from the speaker. Was this real? This overgrown, broke mama's boy actually thought he could use my family's prime Beijing real estate to house the very people who had just tried to psychologically abuse me. Where on earth did he get the sheer nerve to even utter those words? I let out a harsh, freezing chuckle. "Tran Li, if your brain has rotted to this extent, I suggest you march yourself straight into the nearest psychiatric ward in your county town. You want your parents to live in my family's apartment. Are you having a stroke? Do they honestly think they are worthy of sleeping under a roof my parents paid for?" This was the absolute first time in our entire relationship that I had used such raw, elitist language to describe his family. The line fell completely silent for a few agonizing seconds. Then the distinctive sound of Li Xuan's voice filtered through the background, deliberately pitching her tone into a theatrical, tragic wail. "Oh, look at this. I don't want to live anymore. I, Li Xuan, have lived an honorable, dignified life, and now not only is my face dragged through the dirt, but my own daughter-in-law says I'm not worthy of living in a Beijing apartment. Good heavens, what sins did I commit in a past life? How did our pure family marry such a completely cursed, insolent, disrespectful woman? Suena, let me just die right now. Let me throw myself into the well so I don't have to be an eyesore to this brilliant city princess." Listening to her pathetic performance, I burst out into a loud, mocking laugh. "You're right about one thing, old lady. It really is a tragedy of cosmic proportions. Who else could possibly be as profoundly cursed as I am? I must have been legally blind and utterly brain-dead to marry into a family of absolute parasites like yours. Do us all a favor and stay in your village to pollute your own country air. Please spare the citizens of Beijing from your presence. And if you truly don't want to live anymore, go ahead and jump. Do you need me to transfer you some money so you can buy a sturdy rope? If you think hanging looks too ugly, I noticed the river at the edge of your village looks plenty deep. Go take a swim." Li Xuan let out a blood-curdling screech. Tran Li roared into the receiver, completely beside himself with rage. "Ding Jai, you have crossed the absolute line. How dare you speak to my mother like that? Get your ass back here and apologize this instant." "Go back," I sneered. "Go back so your vile family can slow cook me into depression? Apologize, not in this lifetime, and certainly not to you. Tran Li, listen to me carefully. I am divorcing you." The moment the word divorce echoed through the line, his aggressive demeanor collapsed like a house of cards.
His tone immediately softened, turning desperate and pleading. Of course, he didn't want to divorce. Where else on God's green earth was a broke, rural-born guy going to find an only-child Beijing native with multiple properties who was stupid and naive enough to marry him for zero bride price? If he lost me, his golden ticket to upper-class city life was permanently revoked. Wife, honey, stop talking nonsense. We're just having a silly little argument. It doesn't need to go that far. Where are you right now? Tell me where you are. I'll come find you. Let's just sit down and talk like adults, okay? We are a family. We share a child. Why do we have to blow things completely out of proportion? Can't we just both take a step back? I've been driving all over the village looking for you, and I can't find you anywhere. Honey, please tell me where you are. I'm genuinely terrified something happened to you and the baby. If this had happened a week ago, those desperate, honeyed words might have actually worked. My soft heart would have melted, and I would have blamed myself for being too emotional. But I had stood outside that window. I had heard their true, unfiltered nature. I knew with absolute certainty that their intent was to systematically crush me into submission. Oh, you can't find me in the village? Of course you can't. I'm already back in Beijing.
Beijing? Tran Li's voice cracked violently. He hadn't in his wildest, most paranoid dreams expected that a woman traveling with a 3-month-old infant could move with such terrifying military efficiency. Wife, are you joking, right? How could you possibly be in Beijing already? Do I sound like I'm joking? I replied smoothly. This time, panic completely seized him. But what about the 100-day feast? My family already paid non-refundable deposits for the banquet tables in the village hall. We already invited every relative from 3 neighboring counties. If you're in Beijing, what happens to the feast? What are my relatives going to think of us? I let out a final, chilling laugh. Do whatever you want with the feast. Think whatever you want to think. What does your family's social suicide have to do with me? I didn't waste another breath. I hung up the phone, blocked his number, and finished my hot pot in peace. Once I was full, I collected my baby from the attendants and rode straight to my parents' apartment. When my parents opened the door and saw me standing there with bags and a baby, they were completely bewildered. I had only been gone for a few days. Why was I back so suddenly? I sat them down on the living room sofa and relayed every single detail, from the empty chicken plate and the broth poured over Tran Li's head to the horrific conversation I overheard outside the gate. My dad's face turned bright purple with fury. He slammed his fist onto the solid wood coffee table so hard the teacups rattled. Those absolute bastards! Give me his phone number right now. I am going to call that degenerate and his hillbilly parents and teach them exactly what happens when they abuse a daughter of the Din family. I gently reached out and pat his arm, calming him down. Dad, don't waste your energy. I've already blocked him. I'm divorcing him. My mind is entirely made up.
Hearing the word divorce, my mother's traditional instincts kicked in and a look of worry clouded her face. Jai, are you absolutely sure? You're still so young and the baby is only 3 months old. Raising a child in a single-parent household is incredibly difficult. Children from broken homes often face severe psychological issues as they grow up. Since you two live in Beijing anyway, can't you just tolerate his parents during holidays? I looked at my parents, a small strategic smirk playing on my lips. Mom, Dad, if I divorce him, I will fight for absolute custody, and once the divorce is finalized, I am legally changing Lei's surname. She will no longer carry the Tran name. She will take our surname, Ding. From that day on, she belongs strictly to our lineage." The moment the words left my mouth, the entire atmosphere in the living room shifted instantly. My dad's eyes, which had been narrowed in anger, suddenly snapped wide open. A brilliant, blinding spark of joy flashed across his face. As an only child who had only raised an only daughter, the thought of his biological grandchild carrying on the Ding family name was the ultimate dream he had never dared to voice. His entire stance on modern marriage flipped right then and there. "Divorce him," my dad shouted, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. "What's so bad about divorce anyway? Look at the world today. Plenty of single-parent children grow up to be extraordinarily successful. Look at Eileen Gu, raised by a single mother, and she's an Olympic champion. Divorce is fantastic," he continued, nodding vigorously. "Living with a toxic, parasitic family like that lurking in the background would only ruin your life. Divorce him immediately." He scooped little Lei out of my arms, planting a massive, loving kiss on her chubby cheek. "Oh, my precious little Ding granddaughter, don't you worry about a thing. After your grandpa passes away, every single apartment, every piece of land, and every cent in my bank account belongs entirely to you." Just like that, the son-in-law was permanently erased from their minds, tossed into the trash bin of history. A son-in-law could never compete with a legacy-bearing granddaughter. Part 6. The Trap in the Living Room. The moment Tran Li realized I had fled to Beijing and was dead serious about a divorce, his world completely imploded. The shame of the cancelled 100-day feast, combined with the looming threat of losing his Beijing lifestyle, drove him into a frenzy. The very next day, he abandoned the village, boarded a high-speed train, and rushed back to the capital. But he didn't come alone. He brought his entire baggage train along. Li Suen and his father, Tran Trung Kui. The only reason I knew they had arrived at our apartment was because of a brilliant security measure I had installed during my postpartum recovery. To ensure the nanny I hired wouldn't mistreat the baby, I had hidden several high-definition, audio-enabled surveillance cameras throughout the living room and bedrooms. I sat comfortably on my parents' sofa, opened the security app on my phone, and watched the live feed. What I saw made my skin crawl. My father-in-law, Tran Trung Kui, was currently sprawled like a king across the expensive, custom Italian leather sofa I had spent months sourcing. His dirty, mud-stained sneakers were propped right up on my pristine marble coffee table, rocking back and forth. One of his hands was scrolling through TikTok, while the other held a cheap, foul-smelling cigarette. Every few seconds, he casually flicked the hot ash directly onto my hardwood floor. Meanwhile, Li Suen was lying flat across my silk sheets in the master bedroom, her phone pressed to her ear as she loudly updated her village relatives. "Yeah, the feast is cancelled. I'm currently living in Suenya's luxury apartment in Beijing right now. It's massive." "That little city wench? Oh, she's not here. She ran back to her parents' place like a coward. That little bitch completely ruined our family's reputation back home. Just wait until she comes crawling back. I am going to discipline her until she bleeds." "Oh, sister, you have no idea," she sneered, opening my wardrobe doors and throwing my clothes around. I just opened her closet. It's stuffed with expensive clothes, enough to last 3 lifetimes. The girl is as skinny as a beanpole, but she actually bought all this slutty, provocative lingerie to seduce my son. Foutu! Absolutely shameless. I told Suenya from the beginning he should have married Li Fyong, that good sturdy girl from our village. She knows how to manage a household and work the fields. But no, he had to choose this high-maintenance city trash, and now look at the embarrassment she's caused us.
Divorce? Huh, you think she actually dares? She's just bluffing to scare us. If she divorces my son, where else is a used woman with a kid going to find a man as perfect, handsome, and educated as my Suenya? Right then, Tran Li's voice drifted in from the living room. Mum, shut up. Stop talking so loud. What if Jai Jai is actually serious about the divorce? I'm not trying to blame you, Mum, but you moved way too fast. I told you we should wait until she gives birth to a second child, preferably a son, before we started breaking her in. Liu Suen let out a disgusting, wet spit onto my bedroom floor. Serious my ass. Once a woman has popped out a child, what is there left to be afraid of? Do you honestly think this is like the dating phase where our entire family has to worship her? Son, I am a woman who has lived through this. Let me tell you a universal truth. Once a woman gives birth, she is permanently chained to the household. No mother can ever bear to abandon her biological child. Even if you beat her and kick her out the door, she will crawl back on her hands and knees for the baby. Tomorrow, the three of us will march over to her parents' house, put on a little show, say some sweet words, and coax her back here. Once she's back under our roof, we will take our time and systematically break her spirit. This time, your parents and I are never leaving Beijing. We're staying right here to lock her down. If you want to destroy a woman, there are a million quiet ways to do it. Women raising babies are incredibly prone to postpartum depression. Once she's properly depressed, it's very easy for them to get suicidal thoughts and jump out a window. And once she dies, wouldn't this entire luxury apartment, her family's money, and all her properties automatically belong to us? Tomorrow, we go collect her. Even if her parents scream and curse at us, we just swallow our pride and smile. Son, your parents are enduring this massive humiliation entirely for your future wealth. Once we take over everything, you must avenge us. Tran Li nodded vigorously, his face cold and calculating. I understand, Mum. Thank you. Watching this display of filial piety and motherly love through the glowing screen of my phone, a profound, icy amusement washed over me. Initially, I had intended to go through a standard civil legal divorce and split the assets cleanly. After all, the down payment for our apartment had been split 50-50, though his half came entirely from his high-paying tech salary over the years, while my half came from my parents. But hearing their literal murderous plot to drive me to suicide so they could inherit my family's wealth, game on. Since they wanted a war of attrition, I was going to show them exactly what a native Beijing girl is capable of when her life is threatened. Who was going to swallow whom remained to be seen. I gave my parents a brief, highly sanitized summary of the situation, telling them that the Tran family was coming to offer a fake apology the next morning and that we needed to play along to trap them. Sure enough, at precisely 8 o'clock the next morning, the 3 members of the Tran family stood before my parents' door. Their heads were bowed, their expressions heavy with rehearsed humility and deep remorse.
Li Swan was the first to step forward. She grabbed my hands, her eyes instantly welling up with tears, her voice trembling with fragile guilt. Jai Jai, it's all my fault. This old lady has come to beg for your forgiveness. That day, my old brain was completely muddled, and I entirely forgot you were actively breastfeeding, and I let us eat all the food. It was a heinous, stupid mistake. The blame lies entirely on my shoulders. Please forgive your foolish mother. You know I have always loved you like my own biological daughter.
Tran Li stood beside her, his head hanging low. He stepped forward, gently taking my arm, his voice a soft, submissive whisper. "Wife, it's all my fault. I was a terrible husband. For the sake of our beautiful daughter, please give me one last chance. We've been together for so many years. Are we really going to destroy our love over a single plate of chicken? I swear on my life this will never happen again. From now on, whenever a meal is cooked, you eat first. Only after you are completely full will the rest of the family touch the chopsticks, okay?" Even my father-in-law, Tran Chuang Kui, chimed in, squeezing out a tight smile. "Yes, daughter-in-law, look at us. Your mother and I traveled all this way just to apologize. Don't divorce Li Er. Let's live a good life together." Looking at their masterclass in acting, it was truly terrifying how sincere they appeared. If I hadn't watched the hidden camera footage the night before, I would have undoubtedly fallen for it. Following our pre-arranged script, my dad let out a heavy sigh. "Jai Jai, since your in-laws have traveled all this way and humbled themselves to apologize, perhaps you should show some mercy." My mum quickly chimed in. "Yes, Jai Jai, forgive Tran Li this once. Every marriage faces rough patches and friction." I allowed my face to twist into an expression of intense, agonizing internal conflict. Finally, I let out a long, defeated sigh. "Fine. For the sake of Lei, I will forgive you this one time. But hear me clearly. If there ever is a next time, don't bother wasting your breath on an apology. We will meet directly at the Civil Affairs Bureau for a divorce." The three of them obviously didn't expect me to cave so easily. Flashes of pure, triumphant joy erupted across their faces before they quickly masked it back into humble nods. I smiled back, a dark, venomous promise locked deep within my heart.
Part 7. The Unhinged Daughter-in-Law. That very afternoon, I packed my bags and moved back into our apartment with the Tran family. But I didn't return as the sweet, accommodating girl they once knew. Before they could even begin their psychological warfare to drive me into depression, I decided to take the initiative. I became the ultimate, unhinged, short-tempered nightmare of a daughter-in-law. The rule was simple: the best defense is a terrifying offense. The moment any of them did a single thing that displeased me, I flipped the switch instantly. Slapping, screaming, throwing plates, smashing bowls, I escalated every minor inconvenience into an absolute psychological crisis for them. Oh, you wanted to drive me to depression. Let's see who gets institutionalized first. One evening, my mother-in-law intentionally cooked a massive spread of food. Knowing full well that I cannot tolerate spicy food, she loaded every single dish with handfuls of red chili peppers. The moment I sat down and saw the red-streaked plates, I didn't say a word. I turned around, wound back my hand, and delivered a roaring, resounding slap straight across Tran Li. Slap! Tran Li was rocked back, his hand clutching his bright red cheek, completely stunned. "Ding Jai, what the hell? Are you completely useless?" I screamed at the top of my lungs, slamming my fist onto the table. "Did you not tell your mother that I cannot eat spicy food? You did this on purpose. You are intentionally trying to create friction between me and my mother-in-law. You want us to fight, you toxic, manipulative piece of garbage." Tran Li was utterly bewildered and terrified by my sudden explosion. Li Xuan stood by the stove, her chest heaving with fury and heartbreak over her precious son being struck, but because their grand plan required keeping me in the house, she didn't dare utter a single syllable of protest. On another occasion, after I had spent the entire night awake soothing and feeding the baby, I finally managed to drift off to sleep at 7 in the morning. Lee Swan began her old routine, deliberately stomping up and down the hallway, slamming the kitchen cabinets, and loudly opening and closing doors right outside my room to ensure I couldn't sleep. I didn't argue. I got out of bed, smiled sweetly, and went back to sleep when she left.
But that night, I set a loud, blaring alarm on my phone to go off every single hour on the dot. At 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and 4 a.m., I marched violently into the master bedroom where Tran Lee and his mother were sleeping. I threw open the doors, flipped on the blinding overhead lights, and shook them awake. Wake up, time to use the bathroom. Are you thirsty? Do you want some water? Are you hungry? Should I boil some instant noodles for a midnight snack? By the third night of this relentless psychological torture, both Tran Lee and Lee Sun looked like walking corpses. The dark circles under their eyes were so massive and bruised they could have easily competed with the national giant pandas. But I didn't stop there. I began a systematic campaign of psychological emasculation against my husband. Every single day, multiple times a day, I ridiculed his worth. You're completely useless. You make so little money compared to city men. Your performance in bed is embarrassingly short. I honestly don't know why I ever downgraded my life to marry a country peasant like you. Tran Lee's face would turn a deep, suffocating shade of green with pure, suppressed rage. But he had to bite his tongue and swallow his pride. After all, until they could successfully execute their long-term plan to seize my properties, they had to keep me appeased. They were terrified I would walk out and file for divorce. Within a month of this absolute reign of terror, my mental health was completely revitalized. I felt energized, ecstatic, and profoundly entertained. Conversely, the 3 members of the Tran family walked around the apartment like terrified ghosts, deeply depressed and visibly on the verge of a collective mental breakdown. But these petty household mind games were just the warm-up. If I didn't utterly destroy their lives and dismantle their entire existence, I wouldn't be doing justice to the pure malice they had harbored against me. Part 8. The climax in the courtyard. The tension inside our apartment grew so thick it felt like a suffocating fog. My father-in-law, Tran Trung Quy, who had always been a coward at heart, couldn't handle the constant screaming matches and psychological warfare. To escape the house, the moment dawn broke, he would flee to the nearby district park. Now, public parks in Beijing are entirely different from the rural dirt squares of his village. The older women who gathered there for morning square dancing, Quang Trang Wu, were elegant, self-assured, beautifully dressed, and exuded a fierce city confidence. Tran Trung Quy, a lifelong villager, was instantly mesmerized. Within a week, he became completely obsessed with the square dancing crowd, leaving early in the morning and returning only after dark, smelling faintly of cheap women's perfume. Until one fateful Tuesday morning. I was in the living room folding laundry when a violent, thunderous pounding echoed through our front door. It sounded as though someone was trying to break the door off its hinges. Tran Lee rushed out of his home office, and Li Xun cautiously cracked open her bedroom door. I stepped forward and pulled the door open. Standing in the hallway,
was a mob of 5 large, burly men, their faces flushed with absolute fury. The man leading the group, a towering figure with a thick gold chain around his neck, took one look past me and locked his eyes onto my father-in-law, who was trying to hide behind Tran Li's back like a frightened child. Li Shun, seeing a group of aggressive city people invading her space, let her old village instincts take over. She shoved past me, puffed out her chest, and began screaming like a banshee. "What do you think you're doing, barging into our home? Who are you calling a pervert? Your mother probably is the one who isn't decent. She probably saw my handsome old man in the park and seduced him first." The leader of the group turned bright red with pure fury. He pulled out his smartphone, pulled up a WeChat log, and shoved the glowing screen directly into Li Shun's face. "Shut your filthy mouth, old woman. Look at this. Look at the disgusting, explicit, perverted messages this old dog sent to my 60-year-old mother. He was literally stalking her around the park, trying to touch her."
Li Swen didn't even look at the screen. She violently slapped the phone away, her voice screeching to an even higher, glass-shattering decibel. "Flies don't flock to an uncracked egg. If your mother was a loose, flirtatious slut, why would my husband target her? Why didn't he target anyone else? It's your mother's fault for being a whore." The son's eyes flashed with a dangerous, violent light. He raised a massive fist. Li Swen, fully believing her status as an old woman shielded her from physical consequences, stepped directly into his personal space, thrusting her chin forward. "Hit me! Go ahead and hit me! Let's see if a big city man dares to lay a finger on an old lady! Hit me!" She was relying on her decades of experience using dramatic public tantrums to intimidate people in her village. Unfortunately for her, city people operating on pure fury don't follow village rules. Bop! A ferocious, open-handed slap delivered with the full weight of a grown man's anger connected square with Li Swen's cheek. The sheer force of the blow literally spun her around a full 360 degrees before she collapsed violently against the shoe cabinet. She sat on the floor, completely dazed, clutching her bleeding lip, her eyes wide with a terrifying, absolute shock. For the first time in her life, she didn't dare utter a single sound. Seeing her mother struck down, Tran Li felt his patriarchal pride take over. He stepped forward, trying to look intimidating. "Hey, you can't just walk into a house and assault!" Before he could finish his sentence, the leader's fist slammed directly into the center of Tran Li's face. Crunch! Tran Li's nose broke instantly, blood spurting across his shirt. The other 4 men swarmed in, unleashing a brutal, coordinated barrage of punches and kicks onto his head and chest. Within a matter of seconds, my husband's face was beaten into something resembling a bloated purple pig's head. Li Swen, screaming in agony over her precious son being demolished, found her courage and threw herself onto the men, while Tran Changqui swung a plastic chair wildly. It was a total slaughter. The 3 members of the Tran family were utterly crushed by the angry mob, reduced to crying, groaning heaps on the floor. Throughout the entire chaotic brawl, I stood near the hallway closet, carefully ensuring I was out of the line of fire. I pulled out my phone and quietly turned on the recording app, capturing the entire confession of my father-in-law's text harassment being shouted by the mob. Once the beating slowed down, I put on my best performance. I let out a horrified shriek, rushing into the fray under the guise of breaking up the fight. As I threw my body over Tran Li and his mother to protect them, I used the chaos to violently pinch and gouge at their softest tissues with my long manicured nails. Every time I dug my nails into Tran Li's broken nose or twisted his mother's ear, they let out ear-piercing shrieks of agony, fully believing the blows were coming from the thugs.
Tran Li, coughing up blood on the floor, weakly reached for his phone. I'm calling the police. You're all going to prison. The lead man stepped forward, violently stamping his heavy boot right next to Tran Li's face, missing his ear millimeters. Go ahead, call the cops, you little punk, the man hissed, his voice cold as ice. The moment the police show up, I am uploading these explicit chat logs along with your father's photo, address, and your name straight onto every major social media platform in Beijing. And tomorrow morning, my brothers and I will march straight into your tech company's headquarters. We will sit down in your CEO's office and have a very long, detailed conversation about what kind of disgusting family values their senior engineer possesses. Let's see how long your high-paying city job lasts when the entire internet knows your family is a pack of perverts. The words tech company and internet struck Tran Li like a bolt of lightning. His entire existence, his wealth, and his ability to live in Beijing depended entirely on his corporate reputation. If he was publicly disgraced and fired, he would be forced to return to the village a broken, penniless failure. His hand shook violently as he dropped the phone back onto the floor. He didn't dare dial a single digit. Seeing them completely neutralized, the lead man let out a disgustive spit onto Tran Li's chest, turned around and led his men out of the apartment, slamming the door behind them. The moment the lock clicked, the absolute silence in the apartment broke. Li Sun let out a raw, animalistic screech of pure, unbridled madness. She turned around, her face distorted like a demon, and launched herself straight at her husband, her fingernails ripping savage, bloody gouges across Tran Trung Kui's face. "You disgusting, worthless, perverted old bastard! I'll kill you! I'll kill you for destroying my son's life!" I quickly stepped forward, putting on a face of deep, panicked concern as I pulled her back, whispering softly into her ear. "Oh, Mother, please don't be angry. Be careful with your blood pressure. After all, didn't you say that women raising babies are prone to depression and suicidal thoughts? Look at your husband. He's the one who seems to be losing his mind. If anyone is going to jump out a window today, we wouldn't want it to be you, right?" Li Sun froze mid-air, her eyes locking onto mine. In that exact moment, looking at the dead, remorseless smile on my face, she finally realized the hunter had become the prey. Part 9. The final account.
The divorce proceedings were swifter and more devastating than the Tran family could have ever anticipated. Armed with the high-definition hidden camera footage of them plotting to drive me to suicide to steal my inheritance, along with the audio recordings of the assault revealing my father-in-law's criminal harassment, I held absolute leverage. My lawyer, a ruthless veteran of Beijing's family courts, presented the evidence to Tran Li in a private conference room. He didn't even try to fight. If the footage went public, his career was over. His father would face criminal charges, and his family would be permanently exiled from polite society. He signed the papers, relinquishing absolute custody of Lei without a single dollar of child support demanded. Not that I wanted a single copper coin from his tainted hands. Furthermore, to avoid a public trial, he agreed to sell our apartment, giving me 70% of the total liquidation value for compensation for severe psychological distress. 3 weeks later, the moving trucks arrived. I stood on the sidewalk outside the apartment complex, holding little Ding Lei securely wrapped in a warm blanket.
My dad stood beside me, his chest puffed out with pride, holding the newly issued identification papers showing my daughter's official name change. Down the ramp of the building, 3 figures emerged, carrying worn, plastic-woven bags packed with their remaining earthly belongings. Tran Lee walked in front. His face was still heavily bruised, his posture permanently slumped, his eyes entirely hollowed out of the ambition that had once defined him. Behind him walked Tran Trung Quy, his face covered in dark, jagged scabs from his wife's fingernails, looking like a defeated criminal. And bringing up the rear was Lee Swan, the proud, arrogant matriarch who claimed she would break me like a dog, looked 90 years old. Her shoulders were bent, her clothes were mismatched, and her eyes were fixed firmly onto the dirty concrete pavement, terrified to even glance in my direction. They had arrived in Beijing dreaming of luxury apartments, city wealth, and the systematic destruction of a young woman's mind. They were leaving with broken bodies, ruined reputations, and a permanent return to the subsistence farming life they had spent decades trying to escape. As they reached the edge of the property to walk toward the subway station, Tran Lee stopped. He slowly turned his head, looking at me from across the distance. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something, perhaps a plea, perhaps an apology, perhaps a final question. I didn't give him the satisfaction. I simply adjusted the blanket around my daughter, turned my back on them, and walked toward my father's waiting car. The car pulled out into the sweeping neon-lit avenues of Beijing. The city was alive, beautiful, and utterly indifferent to the small dramas played out within its borders. I looked down on the sleeping face of my daughter. She was beautiful, safe, and free. Many people believe that marriage is a holy union of love, a sacred bond that automatically brings completion to a woman's existence. But as the skyscrapers blurred past my window, I realized the ultimate truth. Marriage is not a sanctuary. It is a mirror. It reflects the absolute depths of human nature, both the sublime and the profoundly monstrous. And sometimes the greatest act of love a mother can perform is not keeping a family together, but having the absolute courage to blow it entirely apart.
Thank you for watching the video. Please subscribe to the channel, like, comments, and share. See you again!